On today's topic, if you obviously you read the title of the video, and I'm discussing selling trees for a profit. And this is a controversial topic for a lot of people. And reason being is there's a lot of bad information being shared out in the internet, social media, and even people on YouTube sharing bad information or very outdated information. So in my line of work, I get asked a lot of questions about various things involving the kind of work I do, especially when it comes to land clearing. And the most common question I get asked is, well, all these trees that you take down, don't you sell them? And when I answer people with my honest answer, I get met with a couple of different types of responses, usually some agitation and disbelief. Some people even want to argue a little bit, and I just tell them how it really is in this industry and in our geographical location. And then I end the conversation if they don't want to listen to what I have to say. And some people go dead silent and don't want to talk anymore, or some people look confused at my response, kind of expecting me to say something different than what I actually do say. And so in this video, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this particular topic. So if you ask me or anybody in my area for a legitimate answer of, do you sell trees for money? If I pay you to come out here and cut my trees down, are you going to give me money for the trees you take? There's no clear-cut yes or no answer to that particular question. I could say yes, but I would not be really telling you the truth unless we had some special circumstances. The answer of no is the most common answer I'm going to give, and everybody that I know in my area is going to give you the answer of no. So there's no simple way to explain this and without going into some detail. And a lot of times people don't want to hear the details. They become argumentative, or they don't believe that they're being told the truth. If you tell them, no, you're not paying for the trees you take down, and no, you're not selling them and making money off of them. And so we got to dive into this a little bit to make sense of it. There's no clear-cut yes or no answer on this because every scenario is different. Every region's different. What's true in my area may not be true in your area. Now, I'm based out of Southeast Georgia, and our area is primarily pine trees. Now, we obviously have a lot of other species of trees in our area, and some of those trees may have some more value to them under the right conditions. So with our predominant tree species here being pine, with most of that pine, and there's two different kinds, you've got natural growth and planted pine. Natural growth is just trees that grow naturally on their own. They weren't planted for any specific reason. And planted pine is when you find a piece of property, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here in just a second. Planted pines are pieces of property that have been cleared, and then new pine trees were planted, little seedlings were planted, and they're planted in rows, very straight rows, for the purpose of harvesting those trees when they reach the right age. They have to be a certain height, they have to have a certain diameter and above to have value. Now, in my area, these planted pines were typically planted for harvest. They're logged or harvested. Logging companies come in, they cut down all the trees, limb them, section them up to the proper lengths, load them on 18-wheeler log trucks, take them to a pulpwood plant where they're just ground up into pulp and used in the paper making process. Most of the natural growth trees are, obviously they're not planted in rows, they're just kind of randomly scattered out, and they're not as easy to harvest, especially if you're trying to make money with them. there are some benefits to natural growth, and then there's some disadvantages. Same thing with planted pine. Now with planted pine, you will, if you wander through the property, you will find other species, you know, some oaks. Typically you'll find oaks and sycamore, elm, stuff like that. People often have been told their entire lives that all trees are valuable, they're worth money, you should never pay anyone to cut down your trees. They should pay you to remove the trees because they're going to go down the road and sell them and make money off of them. So there's a big misconception that a lot of people are told they should either get the trees removed at no cost, or they should, at a minimum, get a reduction in the removal cost because the person cutting them down is going to sell those trees and make money. And a lot of people have been told that if they buy a piece of property, they can have all the trees removed and sell those trees, and they're going to make a lot of money, and that's just not true. So to elaborate on that, I no longer own a particular piece of property. I sold it some years back, about 5-6 years ago, and it was 20 acres. And it was all natural growth, all the trees, pines, oaks. There were some cypress and things like that on the property. And because it's natural growth, the trees are not planted in any specific pattern. They're not in rows. Logging them would be sort of difficult, but not too difficult. A little bit more difficult for a lumber or timber company to come in and cut them down than if they were planted in rows. So with 20 acres of trees, and I'm talking about some very large pine trees, that property used to be, the timber on that property used to be harvested by the previous family that owned it, and then the owner that I bought the land from had reached a point in his life where he was no longer interested in doing that. So after the last time the timber was harvested, he quit planting the trees and just let the property grow up naturally. So what was on the property was a variety of trees, from little tiny saplings, not much bigger than your pinky finger, all the way up to, some of those trees were 2 to 3 feet diameter. And the trees that were 2 and 3 foot diameter were trees that, for whatever reason, were left by the logging company the last time they came in and harvested timber. Now, they all have their own reasons for why they leave certain trees and so on. Won't get into all of that. I could give you some bad information on that, and I don't want to do that. I want you to know the truth about where we are today in 2025. So with 20 acres of primarily pine, a good bit of oak trees in there, and there were some cypress. On 2 different occasions, I was approached by a timber company that was doing logging work in the area, and they wanted to come onto my property and cut down the timber and pay me for it. So I had some conditions with that, and I told each company, and these were on different times. The first company, I told them, I said, I do not want the hardwoods taken down. You can take pine trees. I want it clean when you leave, because if you've never seen a land clearing project or a timber harvesting project, after they come in and harvest all the trees on a piece of property, it looks like somebody dropped atomic bombs on the place. There's just debris everywhere, the ground's torn up. You can't use the land for anything without bringing in some very heavy machinery and spending a lot of time reconditioning the property. Even to replant it with new trees, you'd have a lot of prep work that has to be done. A lot of debris has to be cleaned up, cleared out, burned off, buried, whatever. If you want to build a house on it, well, imagine trying to build a house on something that's full of holes, looks like the surface of the moon. That's what it looks like after a land clearing project or large logging operation. They're in the business to cut down trees and remove the valuable portions of the trees quickly. They get in, they cut the trees down, load them on trucks, and get them out of there. Now, that's not the entire process, but, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but so when you're looking at these pine trees and you're thinking, oh, this company can come in, they can take all these pines, and whatever they pay me is a good bonus to me because I really didn't buy the property with any intention of ever harvesting the timber. Bought the property with the intention of building a house on it, and so when this company approached me, and I gave them my conditions: pines only, no hardwoods, and also don't leave my property a disaster. I don't want to have to clean up anything when you get done. So the guy said, well, I'll go out there and take a look, and I'll call you back and give you a valuation on what your land's, or not the land, but the timber's worth, and what we would pay you to remove it. That person never once came back to my property and looked at it, never gave me a call with a price of what they would give me for the timber. And I actually tried to call the guy a couple of times, and he wouldn't answer my phone calls, wouldn't return my messages. I gave up on him, didn't even bother to pursue it any further. Like I said, I wasn't really interested in selling the timber, but I thought, well, if there's enough money involved and they don't make a disaster area out of my property, it would be worth it. Well, not long after that, another timber company calls me and says, we're logging timber right next to your property. So this timber company was cutting trees across the road from my property, and they were doing what's called every third row. It was planted pine property, and what they do is they go every third row and cut that entire row. And then they move 3 rows down, cut that row, and so on until they've taken all of those trees. And that's typically done in a scenario where the planted pines are planted in rows. And they're planted at different times, which means that some years they can come in and harvest trees using that every so many row system and get what they're looking for, while the others have time to continue to grow, mature, and reach the size that they're looking for. So this company, I knew they were doing this, and I gave him my conditions, and he said, well, when we clear property or take the timber, we do not leave a mess. We, obviously trim the tops off, limb them. He said, we remove everything. We'll grind every limb, every tree top, every root, anything that we take down, all the debris will be mulched up and removed from the property. It will be very clean when we get done, and we will pay you for the trees that we take. So I told the guy, I said, all right, go ahead, go out there, look at it, take it, give me an assessment, tell me how much you're gonna pay, and we'll go from there. The man never stepped foot on my property, never gave me a price, nothing, never even called me back. I tried to call him a couple of times, just like the first company, and he wouldn't even answer the phone, return my phone calls, text messages, nothing. So after that, I just gave up on it. I was like, well, I mean, you people are coming to me asking to buy my trees. I'm not seeking you out, but I'm not going to chase you down to try to sell you a few trees. But when you talk to any of these people that are in the timber industry and talk to them about purchasing timber, clearing property, if there's enough timber to harvest in your area, they do not want to come and take on a project as small as 20 acres. That's not worth their time. Now, the only way they will often consider doing that, they'll consider doing it if they're next to that property and they don't have to relocate equipment and the crews. They come to the same place every day. They just drive across the street and keep cutting and hauling off. And so when you talk to these people in the timber industry, and they all harvest timber for different reasons. Now, there are some that go and harvest property or the timber off of properties, and those trees are, instead of going to one of the local paper mills or sawmills, they get loaded in containers and shipped overseas to other countries. They're sold to buyers in other countries to make wood products wherever they're going. And that's actually kind of common in my area because we're right down the street from the port. So it's an easy avenue to cut down trees, load them up in containers, and put them on ships and send them overseas. It's not as simple of a process if you're in the middle of the United States. being right on the coast next to one of the largest ports in the country, it's easy to do. So when these companies are harvesting trees and they're paying the landowner for the trees, it's typically very large acreage. And I know there are people who own 5 acres, 10 acres, and to them that's very large. And I'm not downplaying it or saying it's not, but in the timber industry, 5 acres, 10 acres, 20 acres is nothing. That is not justify bringing all of the millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment and the crew to harvest a few trees. Because the reality is even on like the 20 acres I own, a large percentage of the trees really weren't worth harvesting and trying to resell, whether to pulp mills, sawmills, or export. So these trees often sit there with the landowner thinking, I've got all this money and worth of trees here, somebody's going to pay me good money. But that's not going to happen, not most of the time. Now there are those exceptions. Maybe you have some hardwoods that are just the right tree and all the conditions are right, they're easy to access, to take down and section up, load onto trucks and take to a sawmill. If you have some really nice, outstanding condition oak trees, yes, that might work. But in general, you're dealing primarily with pine trees, and a lot of natural growth trees, especially on small tracts of land, have a lot of issues that make them not valuable to a sawmill. Sawmill, they have very specific criteria for the trees they buy to mill it down to dimensional lumber. Hardwoods are a different story. I'm definitely no expert in trees and putting values on trees, things like that. But there's tons of information on the internet, and there are people on YouTube that discuss that very topic. But in the grand scheme of things, when we're talking about the average property owner, average homeowner, who, let's say a homeowner owns an acre of land and their house and the yard only consumes a small percentage of that 1 acre. The rest of it's wooded. Well, they're constantly being told, or have been told throughout their life, that they could sell all those trees and make money off of them. So they call companies to come out and clear some of the property with the expectation that the company is going to pay them for those trees and not charge them to cut them down and remove them. But the problem with that is that information goes back to the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, maybe even into the 90s. But it's really not true in 2025. Hasn't been true in about the past 20 to 40 years. And I know that makes some people angry because their grandfather told them, oh, I cut down trees and I sell them and that's how I've paid for everything. Well, that might have been true back when your grandfather was in his 20s. In his 20s and 30s, he might have been able to go out and cut down trees and sell them and make money and make a living, pay for the house, the car, or whatever. But in the society that we live in today, we're in a throwaway society. People want everything cheap. So the wood products that you're buying in stores today, and unless you go to a high-end, very expensive furniture store, the furniture you're buying is made out of particle board. It's just pieces of wood mulch, random species. It's all pressed together, glued together, and then they put a laminate over it and call it wood furniture. And technically it is wood, but it's not the wood furniture that I grew up with and that I seek out when I'm in the market to buy new furniture. But, so, if you own that 1 acre of land and you've got, say, 24 pine trees or half a dozen pine trees and a couple of oak trees, and you want my company or another company to come and buy those trees from you, we're not going to do it because the cost to harvest those trees, prep them, and deliver them to either a sawmill or a pulpwood mill exceeds the value that we're going to be paid for those trees when we get to our customer or the place that we're the customer of. So you have to think about the cost, the labor, the equipment needed depending on the scenario. You might go in with a chainsaw and cut the trees down. Then you got to trim the tops off. You got to take all the limbs off. And you have to have trees that don't have any kind of damage to them. And you do all of that, you section them up to the proper lengths, depending on what your pulpwood mill or your sawmill is requiring before they'll even accept them and even pay you for them. So you take these trees, you do all of this, and let's say you have 2 people on the job, and you spend a couple of days cutting down trees, with the majority of them being pine trees and a few potentially valuable oak trees. You take these trees down, you limb them, section them up. You got to have a trailer that you can put these on with a truck that can tow the amount of weight that's loaded on the trailer. You've got to go to either a sawmill or a pulpwood mill that's within a decent radius of your working area that will buy these trees, deliver it, they evaluate the trees, pay you for them, and you walk away with less money than you have invested in taking these trees down and transporting them. So all you've done is make a couple of dollars off of the trees, but in the gross scheme of it, you've lost money. So the misconception is that every tree is worth a bunch of money. And the internet is full of people telling stories, you know, different social media avenues, web pages, forums. There's people on YouTube. Oh, I had this one nice oak tree on my property and I had it cut down and they paid me $10,000 for that tree. Or you'll hear some lady say that she had an acre's worth of trees cleared out and made so much money she paid off her mortgage and now she lives debt free. And I don't believe the 99% of those stories. Unless you can show proof that that actually occurred, I don't believe you, because there's not enough trees on a half acre or an acre, even 20 acres, to make that kind of money. Not in southeast Georgia. Now, I understand there's parts of this country where you're not dealing with primarily pine trees that are primarily used for pulpwood. I understand that there are parts of the country where you have species of trees that are very valuable and they get more money per board foot or per ton or whatever, depending on how it's measured and paid for in your area. So when people say that they made all this money off of tree sales from a small acreage property, I don't believe them, not typically. So, and I followed the timber industry, the land clearing industry, before I ever even got involved in this line of work, as far as owning a business and doing this kind of work for a living. And I still follow it, and I'm always looking for any new trends, changes in values on things, market price on the services that companies like mine provide, because there's always somebody that will do things for at cost because they think they're making a living off of doing things at cost until they realize they haven't made a penny and their mortgage is going under. That's a different topic. But if you have a small parcel of land, and yes, you may have a lot of trees on that parcel, let's say it's a half acre to an acre, 5 acres, 10 acres, you may have some good trees on that property, but the majority of them probably don't have the kind of value that you think they do or that you're hoping that they do. I'm going to show you some examples here. And I picked this location because I have the 2 scenarios that I want to show you across the street from each other. And being in a location where I can walk around out here and film is kind of unique in my area, because there's typically paved roads, a lot of traffic, and too much activity for me to do this. Now, I don't have permission to be on these properties, so I have to stay out on the roadway. I can only get so close. But what you're looking at right now is what is called planted pines. And I'm going to move slowly, trying not to wiggle the camera too much, but if you'll notice, and they're not planted exactly straight lines from where I'm at, they go at a slight angle, and you can probably kind of tell that in the video. Let me zoom in a little bit for you here. All right, so if you see, you can see how those trees are planted in a straight row, and then there's a gap, and then Here's more trees. And then another gap with more trees, and so on. And this goes on for however many acres of land that covers this stretch of road. And I don't know what the acreage is on it. The property on this road is kind of chopped up and owned by multiple different people. Some of it's actually owned by a timber company. So let me just kind of walk along here and show you this stuff. This is an example of planted pine. These trees were planted in rows intentionally for the purpose of harvesting them when they reached the right age and size. And more than likely, they were going to just go to a pulpwood mill. Not far from here, we had a couple of large pulpwood mills in our area. And that's where the majority of these trees that are grown like this were going. The pulpwood mills were taking this pulp and using it in the paper making process. Now, before I switch to the other side of the road and show you the other style of forestation in this area, when you say, okay, well, you got all these pulpwood mills, how come none of these trees are worth anything? The trees you're seeing right now are worth a lot of money because there are probably thousands of acres of these pine trees in this area planted for the purpose of harvesting. So what you're looking at now is just one little small stretch of a road in this area, and it goes on and on and on. And I would have to drive down the road to show you where it begins and ends. Now, I say that. Right down here, about where the tip of my finger is, there's a little road down there. But these parcels like this, where these timber stands are, the acreage is into the thousands, they will actually be surrounding and wrapping around little small pieces of property they're on with, like, say, a house or something. There may be a public roadway that cuts through it, but each side of that public roadway will be planted pines belonging to one or multiple people or companies, and they're all planted these and growing them for the purpose of selling them to the timber company, who then sells them to a pulpwood mill. So when you're looking at this, these trees will not be sent to a sawmill, or they were not planted with the intention of being sent to a sawmill. And the reason what I'm saying is so important is because in this area, our region, the southeast state of Georgia, was primarily pulpwood mills and paper mills, as far as dealing with trees like this. That's not the only industry we have. We have a lot of industry and different types of industries. But this year, a very large company, paper products company, or manufacturer, had 2 pulpwood mills and paper manufacturing plants in our area. A couple of months ago, they shut down both of those plants and said, we're out of business. These plants are done. And I'd have to check the numbers, but I believe it was 1,300 people were laid off with only 2 weeks notice that they were losing their jobs. The company did not tell the employees at the same time that or prior to the time they made this a public announcement, which is, concerning in its own right, but that seems to be a trend in corporate America now. When you take 2 companies that are the primary paper product making companies in the area, they shut down, and their only statement is there's such a decline in the demand for paper products that these plants are not sustainable. It's costing more to be in operation than we're making. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. There is a lot of talk in the timber industry about that. Now, these 2 plants are just 2 of many that have closed in the past 1 to 2 years throughout the United States. And as I'm making this video, a couple of days ago, there was a new article for a pulpwood mill and sawmill in a town that's about 2.5 hours from where I am. Just announced that at the end of the month, they're shutting down. The strain on them to try to make a profit is just not worth staying in business. They said they can't make money, they're not making money, they don't have customers to buy their products, and so on. Well, All right, so there's 3 companies, large companies, in a small region of one state that have shut down. And I've been reading reports that there are a lot of companies, those type of companies throughout the United States over the past several years have been shutting down, all with citing lack of demand for paper products as their reason. Now that may be accurate, maybe partially accurate, I don't know. It's, you know, I do believe there's some truth to that, because for the past, what, 10, 15 years, 20 years, everybody in this country has been pushing this Go Green initiative. Everything needs to be done electronically. There should be no more paper usage. Send it in an email, don't write it on paper and mail it. And a lot of it's due to efficiency. It reduces cost and so on. Times change, and we have to adapt with the changes or we get left in the dust. But so going back to these paper mills, these pulpwood mills, being the biggest consumers of these trees that you're looking at right now, no longer existing. We had 2 in our area and another one 2.5 hours away. So you can say 3 in this small region that have shut down and laid off all employees. And all those people have to find a new way to make a living. And it's not just the employees of those paper mills that lost their jobs. The people involved in that process goes much deeper than just the people that are clocking in and out at the pulpwood mill or running a machine that's processing paper or cardboard or whatever, toilet paper, paper towels, and so on. Think about this. You're looking at these planted pines that were planted years ago, at least 10 years ago, for the purpose of having them harvested and sold to those plants. Well, those plants are gone. So now whoever owns this property now has no customer to sell these trees to. So this landowner's got all this land that's set here with the intention of being harvestable timber, that now they don't have anybody to sell this timber to. So now what do they do with all of these trees and this land? That's up to that landowner to decide what they're going to do. Now let's take it a little bit another step. This landowner wants to sell this timber to one of those pulpwood mills. You need to hire a forester to come in here and evaluate your timber stand and tell you what this is worth, approximately. You have to have permits to harvest this timber and sell it. At least in our county, you have to have permits for this. And you have to pay taxes and all that on the profit made and so on. So the forester comes out, evaluates this, then you select a timber harvesting company. That company has a lot of people doing a lot of different jobs. It's not 2 or 3 guys trying to make a couple of dollars to cover their rent this month. You're talking about large companies, large operations. You have full office staffs doing all the clerical administrative duties to make the business operate day to day. You have all of the foremen, the crew, the ground crew, you have equipment operators, you have all of those people that come out here and cut all these trees down, limb them, section them, stack them up, load them onto the trucks, send the trucks to the paper mill. Well, now you got the log trucks. Those log trucks are typically independent operators who contract out with these timber harvesting companies to haul these trees for them. So you've got the timber company, the forester, that now has far less work to do, if any work. You have, with the timber company, all of those people that are involved in the process of taking these trees from what you're looking at now to getting them to a pulpwood mill and having them processed and turned into the paper products that we all buy in the store. So you got the log truck, he has no logs to haul, so now what's he gonna do? Now he's gotta go do something else when he's spent the past 10, 20 years hauling logs to a paper mill. When somebody says, well, all my trees are worth money and you need to pay me for the trees I'm having you take out of my property, think about what all I just said. The primary purchaser of these trees no longer exists. There's a company, a logging company, about an hour and a half south of where I am. And when these paper mills shut down, they said, we're now having to ship trees to Florida. You know, we're having to make a 2.5 hour trip one way to deliver logs to the one place that will buy them. But we're now competing with everybody in Florida and everybody in Southeast Georgia, because now there's one company buying versus 3, 4, 5 companies. With all of these sawmills and pulpwood mills shutting down, and all these companies trying to sell trees, there's only a few customers for these trees, and they're quickly overwhelmed, and they say, we're not buying anything for quite some time, we're overloaded. Most of these trees will rot before we can process them. These are the trees that people are always talking about making enough money to retire off of. But who are you going to sell them to? Who's paying for them? And anybody that will buy these, they're going to give you pennies on the dollar. You know, these trees are not worth hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're worth thousands of dollars. Not life-changing money. It's not like you won the lottery and cashed in, you know, $50 million and you can live the rest of your life on the interest in the $50 million. You know, unless you own thousands and thousands of acres of planted pine like this, your trees have very little value. There are very few companies in this area that still process trees and make dimensional lumber or slabs and other things, other wood products. Those are small scale operations that have a limited capacity for intake. They have a limited capacity for production and output. You know, the mom and pop sawmills from the 60s and 70s and 80s, almost every one of them's gone. There's only maybe 2 or 3 or 4 in my area. And this is some guy with a sawmill, you know, a little small sawmill operation in his backyard, that when he has time, he goes out there and mills some trees into lumber and uses it himself or sells it. But, you know, he's not bringing in 18-wheeler log truck loads of trees and processing them. So, you know, and the people like that, they only buy trees when they actually need them and when they can use them at that moment that you bring it to them. They don't have large storage yards where they have 20-foot high stacks of trees waiting to be processed. They have a couple of trees on the ground that they go and move over to their sawmill and mill it into lumber and do something with it. I can't come in here and harvest all this timber and sell it to a pulpwood mill. I just don't have that kind of an operation. Even though I do land clearing, I'm not a land clearing company that does this kind of work. There's a big difference between what I do and what these timber harvesting companies do. You know, I don't have $10 million worth of equipment and 50 crew members to go out and harvest thousands of acres of trees a week. We've talked about the planted pines. Well, now what I'm showing you, this is natural growth forest here. And I know it's hard to see, but you've got pines and there's oaks and there's all kinds of different stuff in here. And I'm not even going to try to list all the different tree species that are in there because I may say something wrong. I'm not a tree species expert. But if you look in there, you can see there's some tall trees, but man, they're not of any value. And this is the kind of stuff that people think is worth, you know, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. And that is not the case here. This stuff is, most of what's in there has zero value. It's stuff that you remove to get out of the way to get to what's of value. It's vegetation, a variety of little saplings and miscellaneous trees that do not have value now and more than likely will never have value. The truth behind all of this is it's more likely that this property will be cleared and developed before any of these trees become valuable, if they ever do become valuable. And so looking in here, I mean, look at how open it is back in there. Let me zoom in for you. There are some open areas back in there where there's almost no trees, or it's little scrub, what we call scrub oak and shrub and stuff like that. You're looking at trees in there that have almost zero value or no value at all. I mean, they're not worth anything. This tree is not worth anything. That's a tree that's just, well, actually, it's starting to die up at the top and pieces are falling off, but look at how it's all branched out, all different directions, leaning, curved. It's got damage on it that doesn't come out clear in the video. Another dead tree that just hasn't fallen all the way over yet. But most of this stuff is garbage. put you there so you're see a little bit closer up on some of this stuff. Look at this tree. You know, actually it's two trees that are growing side by side. No value. This tree's dead. This little one here right in front of me. But this stuff has no value, and people are under the misconception that this stuff is valuable. Like if somebody called me to come and cut that tree right there, thinking that I'm gonna pay them for it because I'm gonna sell it and make money, that's just not true. That tree has no value. Nobody's gonna buy that from me. And that's gonna get cut up and burned is what's gonna happen with that. Now that's a fence post, but there's a dead piece of tree right here. And look at this tree. All right, so if you own property that's got this kind of stuff on it, and you're thinking because somebody at some point in your life told you you could sell all this and make money, I'm going to tell you now, that's not going to happen. You're not going to make money with this stuff. There's little random pine trees in there that are maybe 2 inches diameter. And for a tree to have any value, it's going to need to be 8, 9 inches diameter minimum to be able to mill that into lumber. So with the pulpwood mill thing being out of the question here, dead tree, mostly it's out of the question. The ones that are still existing are too far from my area to drive to. It would cost more money and time and fuel than you would make selling the trees on small scale for somebody like me and most of the people that do what I do for a living in this area. And there's a decent pine tree, but it's full of curves. But the problem is that, all right, this one pine tree, even if that tree was desirable to a sawmill, they're not going to give me enough money to cover the cost of cutting it down and taking it to them. There's no money in that tree. And I've been looking at some reports, recent reports of what trees are selling for, and it's hard to get an accurate dollar amount. Most of the reports are coming from parts of the country that just, there's no comparison between those parts of the country and my part of the country. YouTube's full of people explaining how to evaluate trees, how to sell them, how to get the most money, and so on. But they're always in another part of the country talking about species of trees that we don't even have here. And I get that those trees they're talking about bring higher prices per tree, per ton, per board foot, whatever. Everybody tells you a different way to evaluate trees for the value that they have in them. And you know, like this tree here is dead. All right, so all you're doing when you cut that down is just eliminating it being there and preventing it from falling and damaging something else, landing in a roadway or on a house or whatever. But you see all of these trees, I mean, there's just too many things wrong with them. They're not big enough. You know, so if you own property that looks like this and expecting somebody to buy these trees from you or reduce the clearing cost, thinking that all this stuff's going to get sold, well, that's wrong. And I get that people have been telling you that your whole life. I'm not criticizing your source of information. I'm just telling you that anybody that told you that all this is worth money, they're referring to a time in history that either you and I weren't even born yet, or we were very small children. Before I opened my own business, doing this, I was always researching to see. I owned land, thought maybe I could sell some of this stuff and make some kind of money, cover some of my cost of prepping the land for building a house or whatever. And I started digging in and researching, and everything I found was just complete discouragement. It's like, wow, you really can't make money with this, what you're looking at now. I mentioned earlier about having owned 20 acres of land and 2 timber harvesters contacting me about buying the timber off of my property, and then they didn't even bother to give me an offer because They just loaded up and moved on. They were like, there's not enough in there it's not worth our time. We won't cover our cost of harvest. So they just moved on. Unless you really dig deep into this topic, it's hard to comprehend that you're looking at all this land and full of trees and you can't sell them and make money. And you know, I've had people even they became argumentative when I told them that the trees I do take down, I don't sell them, can't sell them, there's nobody buying them, nobody wants them. There's so many things wrong with them that they're of no value to the people that do buy trees. And I don't know, some people get really agitated, and they get agitated because if you can get them to open up a little bit, it all goes back to, oh, well, you know, my dad used to cut down trees and he sold them and he made good money. Okay, well, when did he do that? Well, you know, when I was a little kid. I'm like, well, you're 50-something years old now. Are you talking about 40 years ago, 50 years ago? I'm like, yeah, I get it. Your dad cut down trees and sold them and made a couple of bucks in the 70s and the 80s. But this is 2025 and we're in a different world. Times have changed drastically. And every industry is affected, not just the timber harvesting industry. And then some people, they just get total silent and don't want to talk anymore because now they're confused. They're like, well, you're telling me that what my dad or my grandfather told me is wrong. And there's no way my dad or grandfather could have ever been wrong. I'm not saying they were wrong. I'm just saying that in 2025, what they did in 1985, it's not the same thing. Just because they cut down 4 or 5 trees for somebody and took them to a sawmill and sold them and made a couple of bucks in 1985 doesn't mean that that's going to happen in 2025. From my own personal experiences on personal land and in operation of my company, you go into this and you look at this from this road and you think, there's nothing in there but bushes and trees. That you'd be amazed at the stuff you find in those woods that should never have been there. You find cars, boats, steel cable from logging operations from 30, 40, 50 years ago, chains, fuel cans, equipment parts, glass, tires. I mean, if you can think of it, I have encountered it in the woods. And these are things that become a nuisance when you're trying to clear property. Even if you're just clearing all this stuff and hauling it away to a dump, landfill, piling it up and burning it, whatever method you're using to get rid of this stuff, there are so many things that interfere with that you have to factor that into cost of clearing land. If I go in there and I start clearing this property and I come across a car, well, now I got to work around the car and hope that there's no other car parts around it that's going to damage my equipment. And, you know, clearing land like this, you might come in, you know, some areas in here are open enough. You can come in there with a tractor and a cutter and mow down a lot of this vegetation to open up the area and then select cut trees, you know, whatever, depending on what your goal is, right? So look at this tree. That's not even worth a box of toothpicks. And then you got a large pine there. Now that pine would have some value, but not by itself, and that being the only tree. You could mow some of this brush down. You could come in here with a forestry mulcher, you know, a skid steer with a mulching head on it, and mulch a lot of this brush and the small saplings and stuff like that, and then figure out what you want to do with any trees that are left standing. You could come in here with a bulldozer and just start pushing everything down that the dozer will push down, pile it up and burn it. It just depends on what your intentions with the property are. Forestry mulching is a great option, but forestry mulching is not the most ideal way of clearing land if you're going to build something on it, because the roots, stumps, and everything has to come out of the ground. And I'm going to make all the people that run forestry mulching businesses angry, but it has its time and place. If I wanted to clear this and build houses in here, everything has to go. I have a customer that's a property developer, and they're buying properties and clearing them and putting homes on them. And the owner told, his instructions were everything in the cleared area has to be removed. No trees, no stumps, no brush, no nothing. I want raw dirt on the ground, holes filled, and it graded so that we can put the home there, and then when the home process is finished, they can seed and straw the yard, get grass growing. And, you know, so forestry mulching is only ideal in some areas, whereas there's times where forestry mulching is the best option. It's the simplest, most affordable option, because bringing a bulldozer in is not really the right thing for your situation. Coming in here with an excavator and taking things down, stacking it up, you know, that's an option. Again, depends on your end use of this land. If all you want is to remove the underbrush and just thin it out so you can see what you have, or maybe you just like the property thinned out and want to leave the trees alone, you know, coming in with a forestry mulcher would be the ideal way to take this job on and do it efficiently. You can get rid of all the brush, the small saplings and dead trees, and, you know, just the stuff that's just making it look trashy. That would be a great option. But if you're going to build a house, you got to remove everything. And I don't know, there's developers in my area that they'll have a forestry mulcher come in and mulch up everything that they can see above the surface, and then throw a house up on top of it. And I can tell you what's going to happen is over time, you're going to have issues where all those stumps and roots were left. The foundation's going to move, it's going to crack, the walls are going to move and crack. You're going to have structural issues in a short amount of time. So, you know, you've got to pick the right tool for the job based on the intended end result. A couple of trees here that are, you know, these pine trees here and the one in the background, you know, those are big trees, and this one's got a lot of where the limbs have recently come off up until, you know, you get right in this area here. When you get to that area, you've got little limbs and stuff, and some companies don't want limbs that low on the trunk or stem. Some call it a stem, but, you know, so that tree, initially, if you're not trained in it, looks like it's got a lot of value. Well, I could get a couple $100 for that. Well, no, you're not. You know, now that tree back there, you see how tall it is. It's, for the most part, straight. It does have a slight curve in it, but not enough to really make a huge difference in its value. But the most recent thing that I read the other day, I was trying to dig and see if I could find any new current information to put in this video, and there's not. Everything's at least 2 to 3 years old. A lot of it going back to 10 years old. So the dollar values that are discussed in all the articles that I was looking at, they're outdated. So I don't know, I don't want to share dollar values with you and then you go look in your area and find out that your area, the trees bring 2 or 3 times as much money. I mean, it's a possibility. But you're looking at this stuff and it's just fiction that this is going to be sold and you're going to make money. Clearing this piece of property and expecting me to pay you for the trees, not going to happen. Nobody in my area is going to come in here and clear this mess and pay you. It's not going to happen. I know I'm contradicting some things that you were told 30 and 40 years ago, but the things you were told 30 and 40 years ago don't apply today. I've tried to give some good explanations in how to decide whether or not clearing property is going to make you money or you're going to spend money. This side of the road, a couple of years ago, if this stand of timber was ready to harvest, whoever owns that would make a lot of money. All conditions identical. This side, nothing. You're going to pay somebody to clear it and you're not going to make any money. if you did make any money, it's not going to be enough to even make any, to even really talk about. You might, depending on the amount of acreage you're clearing, you might get a few trees that are worth reselling. But all you're going to do is cover the cost of harvesting them and transporting them to a mill. You're not making a profit. So companies like mine, we're not going to pay you for your trees. We're not going to sell your trees and make additional profit over what we charged you for the work. Just doesn't happen anymore, and not in our area. So you hire a company like mine, you want to clear this, we're going to give you a price, and that price is going to be clearing this, burning everything that was removed from the trees that were taken down, the brush that was pulled out of the ground, the stumps, roots, anything that needs to be removed. It's all going to get burned. Do a little, ground grading if that's part of the project. But the only money to be made is what minimal profit there is in doing the land clearing project. Leave me some comments. If you're anywhere in the southeast US, South Georgia, or any part of Georgia, and you want to throw some comments in there, throw your opinions in there, or if you know some facts that I might have stated incorrectly or skipped over, throw those in there. Just keep the comments, polite, family friendly. And this is a growing channel, trying to build this channel up. This is fairly new for me to do what I'm doing now. And I'm not making money on this. This is something I do in my spare time. I'm not a monetized channel. I don't get paid to make these videos and upload them.